Great, thank you. All right, well, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Free to Be Me training. My name is Heather. Presenting with me tonight is Ange and Fiona. We are health promotion practitioners with Access Health and Community. Access Health and Community is the local community health service for Boroondara and Manningham. I would now like to start with the acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the lands that we are meeting on tonight and the people who are the traditional custodians of those lands. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We value their ongoing contribution to the cultural heritage of these lands.
I'm Ange, and before we get started, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on some of the features and functions of Teams if you haven't used it before. So this is the menu or control bar that you'll see up the top of your screen, and the main controls that you need to know about, there's the chat function, which many of you used already to say your name and where you're from. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can do so with that next icon. The camera icon will switch your camera on and off, and you're welcome to leave your camera on throughout if you're comfortable to do so. Otherwise, you can just switch it off, and the microphone there as well. And we do ask if you can please mute your microphone to just stop any of that feedback coming through as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So we've got a fair amount of content to get through, so we'll be mindful of keeping to time, and we ask for your patience if there are any technical issues with voice or video. We also encourage you to ask questions and participate in our activities using the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer your comments and questions as we go along. And as Fiona mentioned, the training will be recorded and we'll send you a copy of that recording afterwards. We also like to agree on the following things as a group, just to help everyone make everyone feel comfortable to join in. So no one knows everything, but together we know a lot, and we're here to learn from you just as much as you're here to learn from us. And this session is really about us sharing experiences so that we can learn from each other. There's diversity in the group, and we ask that you respect everyone and their different experiences and opinions. We hope you feel that it is a safe space where you can share your experiences and stories. However, please be mindful that it's not a therapeutic space, and we're not trained to provide that kind of support. And on that note, we will be touching on some sensitive topics which could be difficult to hear and talk about. So if you need to take a break or step away from the computer at any point, please feel very free to do so. If you find that after the session you need to talk to somebody about these topics, you can call either of the numbers on the screen which offer free assistance. At Access Health and Community, we have counselling services as well, which you can use, and possibly your workplace might have counselling such as the EAP or the Employee Assistance Program. Okay.
Well, I thought we could start with a warm-up activity, and I'll just spotlight me. Here we go. And this might be a nice way to get us used to interacting in this online space. So maybe we could try giving a thumbs up with one hand and an OK sign with the other hand, and then have a go at switching that around. And it's actually not as easy as it looks.
We've probably spent a bit too much time practicing this today as well, and we still haven't nailed it.
Feel free to turn your video on so we can see how well you're doing.
Yeah, let's see how you're going with it.
Thanks for joining, Kavita.
Yay! Look at you. You guys have got it. Oh, thanks for joining in.
That's really good, Kavita. That's amazing.
All right, I want to acknowledge, well, we want to acknowledge that everyone is probably coming to tonight's session with different levels of knowledge about the content. We're going to cover some of the basic concepts of gender equity. Oh, sorry, I'm getting some feedback there. We're going to cover some of the basic concepts of gender equity. That's for the benefit of those of you who may not have attended gender equity training before. For everyone else, we hope this is a good reminder that will reinforce what you already know. So the topics that we will be covering tonight include the difference between sex and gender stereotypes and their impact, some practical ideas for breaking gender stereotypes, gender inequality and violence against women. We will have a short break, and then we will talk about the Free to Be Me program and our Action Grants program. We will unpack unconscious bias and the language we use with children, and then we will talk about some strategies around how to deal with resistance. You're on mute, Ange.
Thank you. The purpose of today's training is to increase your knowledge and confidence to support gender equitable practices and the spaces in which children can learn, play and grow. So to unpack that a little bit further, these are the learning outcomes, so the knowledge and skills that we hope you'll walk away from tonight's session with. So we hope that you'll understand the link between gender equity in the early years and the prevention of violence against women more broadly. That you have the knowledge to identify gender stereotypes and understand their impacts, then that you have the skills to implement practice and strategies to break down stereotypes in your centre and increase your confidence as well to respond to resistance and backlash when it comes up as well.
Okay, well, let's start off by talking about the difference between sex and gender. Hands up if anyone has seen or heard of the genderbread person before. There's a few hands going up. That's great. We think the genderbread person is a good tool to use to talk about the differences between these two concepts. So sex is biological. It is the physical characteristics that make us up, like our body parts, male and female body parts, hormones, X and Y chromosomes. It is what we are assigned at birth, male or female. Gender, on the other hand, is a concept that we learn or develop. Gender norms are the roles, behaviours and attributes that society considers appropriate for men and women, and this relates to masculinity and femininity. For example, children are taught that boys have short hair and girls have long hair. They have learnt this because this is what they see and hear from their parents, family, friends and the media. Gender norms and expectations can vary between cultures and change over time. So in this instance, it is now considered more acceptable or even more fashionable for boys to have longer hair and girls to cut their hair short.
I'll go upstairs.
So then we have gender stereotypes. So gender stereotypes mean, when we limit girls and boys and men and women to the roles, behaviours and interests that are expected of them based on gender alone. So research tells us that between the ages of about 2 and 3, this is when children start to identify gender roles and stereotype because they're trying to figure out where they fit in within their group. So, children see these gender stereotypes as rules to abide by. So if they're exposed to subtle messaging around what it means to be a boy or a girl, they're more likely to want to fit into either category because they just want to be accepted by the people in their world. So, these are some of the common gender stereotypes for girls, sensitive, emotional, appearance-focused and things like that. And those more sort of feminine activities, dolls, cooking, princesses, things like that. And this is an example of something in the media that we see. So this was a pen advertisement. So look like a girl, act like a lady, but think like a man, work like a boss. So that's kind of reinforcing those stereotypes about, girls being focused appearance, and the thinking is sort of more the male domain. And, a comment that we might hear could be, have you got your bikini body ready for summer? Again, just reinforcing that appearance stereotype. And these are reinforced through, social media, advertising, but also the people around us. So our parents, carers, families, and other role models. And then, the common gender stereotypes of boys about being tough and adventurous, and still appearance focused, but in a much stronger, more tough kind of way. And a comment that we might hear, when people say, are you babysitting the kids today? Reinforcing that stereotype that men aren't the nurturing, caring, that's not their role, that they're a little bit removed from that as well. Just wanted to, I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay, I'm going to show you a great video that explains gender stereotypes in a light-hearted way, and it also kind of starts to explore, why gender stereotypes can be harmful to children. So I'll just share my screen again. Oops. Sorry. Okay.
Look at this. Look at this. Do you like a dolly? Should we go for the dolly? There's a good girl. You're a good little girl, aren't you, Sophie? Look, what does this say? Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Ooh, look at this, Sophie. Meow, meow. I think she liked that pink dolly the best.
If I were to tell you actually that Sophie is Edward,
does
that change anything?
I maybe thought, oh, this is a little girl, so I have to give her little girl things.
Hello. 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 Come on.
What's this one? What's that one do? Is that a robot? What about this? You like that one? What does this one do? Oliver.
You've gone for, you could say, boy toys for this boy.
Possibly in my subconscious, but for me, I was just going for what was around me, but then perhaps my subconscious was automatically playing a trick on me that I was...
If I tell you that he is actually a girl.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I suppose it's because of the stereotype.
And then that changed your behaviour towards the child.
It did.
And your behaviour was quite directed.
No, you're not.
Beep, 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 beep. Do you want to see my robot?
She's picked up the robot, the car, the puzzle game. I think she's been much more physical in handling the child than the other adults have been with girls.
That really astounded me because I thought that I was somebody that had a really open mind.
I was surprised. So I automatically went for the pink fluffy toy because it was a girl, so I was sort of stereotyping.
I've always thought I was rather more open-minded than that, and I would think, you know, these are children's toys, whatever the gender.
It will make me think the next time I'm with a child, so my niece or my nephew, to make sure that I am actually being sort of fair and equal with all of them, and just giving each child an opportunity to just be whoever they are.
I really like this video because I think, sorry, here we go. Because I think it's, you know, it's interesting that girls are not always exposed to the same toys and experiences as boys, and you know, making that link between, you know, that it might have an impact on their development and growth as well. And it also shows how easy it is for, you know, for someone to gender stereotype without, you know, intentionally meaning any harm. We all kind of, you know, naturally do things like that. Oops, sorry, I don't know what's just going to stop sharing my screen for a sec and fix that. Sorry.
No worries, Ange. And can I say welcome to everybody who's just joined us? Thank you for coming along this evening.
Sorry.
Would you like me to share my screen?
That's okay. I think I've got it now. Thank you, though. Just skip to the... Lovely how everything goes smoothly when you do a trial run and then technical issues get in the way. Okay, so we're talking about gender stereotypes. What is the harm if it's sort of, you know, you're talking about colours or toys or things like that? Does that really have an impact in a broader sense? So, you know, we talk about gender stereotypes being harmful when they limit children's ideas about the roles and abilities of girls and boys. So it can affect the opportunities that they have, and then, you know, potentially the choices that they make as adults. So, you know, we might see things like body image issues if girls are taught to grow up being that appearance focused, and same with boys in a slightly different way. You know, we see more men in leadership positions in STEM careers and women in those more caring and nurturing roles, which, you know, again, there's, you know, not that there's anything wrong with either of those, but, you know, if you might have heard the phrase, if you can't, that you can't be what you can't see. So children need to see people that look like them so that they can aspire to do different things. I think politicians are a really good example of how gender stereotypes can be limiting. And if we think about the senior politicians in Australia, as we can see here, they are mostly male. So it means that, you know, young girls don't have those political role models to look up to and potentially aspire to themselves. It also contributes to gender inequality in a few different ways as well. So typically the female-dominated industries are often undervalued and underpaid, and they're often less stable as well due to the more part-time casual nature of that as well. And in Australia, and numbers are similar around the world, 68% of primary carers for older people and people with disability are women. And we also know that domestic roles and duties are predominantly performed by women as well. Gender inequality it's important to acknowledge that gender stereotypes don't impact everyone in the same way, and there are other factors such as age, ability or disability, which can add another layer to that. I won't show you the video, but hopefully everyone remembers this video that the picture is from, where a BBC reporter was working from his home office and his two kids kind of wandered into the room. And then there was a woman who raced in behind to pull the children out. And when this story was initially reported, it was by media outlets. It was reported that the nanny came in and pulled the children out when in fact she's the mother. So, that kind of assumption made by the media is harmful because it reinforces gender stereotypes, but it also reinforces those racial stereotypes which sit alongside it as well.
Early years educators play a really important role in helping to shape children's understanding of gender roles and stereotypes. And while children don't understand the term gender equality, what they do understand is fairness. You can help to teach them to recognise when individuals and groups are being treated unfairly, and to give them the right words and skills that they need to challenge that unfair behaviour and attitudes like gender stereotypes. The best way to start breaking gender stereotypes and to promote gender equity is by ensuring all planned activities, games and play are inclusive and challenge gender stereotypes through intentional learning methods and everyday learning opportunities. There are lots of practical and easy ways to do this, and we've come up with our own ideas and suggestions, but as we mentioned earlier, we're not early years experts, and we haven't got a lot of experience working with children or using intentional learning methods and everyday learning opportunities to educate children. So this is where we can share experiences and learn from each other. We're now going to split you up into 3 breakout rooms, each with a different scenario, to discuss how you can use different strategies to break down gender stereotypes. Myself and Fiona will be in one of the rooms each to take notes and help facilitate the conversations. We will give you 8 minutes and then bring you back to the main room where we can share the discussions with the rest of the group.
So with Fiona, the group will be talking about how you can set up spaces that are gender neutral and that encourage girls and boys to use the space as well. With me, we'll be talking about how we can encourage children's critical thinking and help give them the skills to challenge gender stereotypes themselves. And then with Heather, you'll be talking about what resources either currently you do use or that you could use to help children understand some of those, key concepts around gender roles, expectations and opportunities as well. And we look forward to hearing about all of the great things that will be contributing to the discussion. And Heather will just pop us in breakout rooms, so we might get a little notification in a few seconds. You won't need to do anything, you'll just be moved automatically to a breakout room.
And please, I welcome you when you join us in the breakout rooms to turn your videos on and have a chat with us. The breakout rooms won't be recorded.
Yes, thanks for that, Fiona. I've just seen that there are 2 guests that I can't. You're using a device or an app that doesn't support breakout rooms. Misan and Angela, I can't assign you a breakout room.
Can you leave one of the groups in the main room, Heather, unassigned? Is that possible?
Yes, I can. Although there won't be anyone to facilitate the conversations in that 3rd group.
That would have to be your group.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'm going to start the rooms. The third room, which is the one that I'm facilitating, will be in this main room, this main group, which means that the conversations may be recorded in this main room, but hopefully you still feel confident, safe to still get involved in the conversation. So I'm going to start those rooms now.
Thanks, Heather.
No worries.
I got declined from joining the room.
Ah.
Let me.
Okay, it looks like everyone else here, we're going to be discussing that third scenario. So I'm just going to put that question for us to discuss in the chat box. So we're going to talk about what resources do you or could you use to help children understand gender, roles, expectations and opportunities. If you'd like to contribute, please unmute yourself. Does anyone have any suggestions?
I try and use some posters and for discussion which do or don't have gender specific roles, because it opens discussion if they do. And yeah, books as well, most that are gender neutral if possible, but others that can then lead to discussion as well with children.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And
sorry, it's Tiffany here, by the way.
Sorry?
It's Tiffany here, by the way.
Oh, Tiffany, thank you for contributing. I wonder what resources could you use to encourage children to think about their identity in different ways? Is this something you already do in your centres?
I think having a variety of resources in dramatic play to help them explore their sense of identity.
And role playing. Good idea. And swapping roles as well. That's really important. So you might encourage the boys to take on the role of that more caring or nurturing character in their role play. Like that maybe they could be the mum that's looking after, or the parent that's looking after the children while the other partner goes off to work.
Yeah.
And what resources could you use to introduce a range of possibilities available to children? So like what they could be when they grow up, that sort of thing.
This is Misan from My Kids. I can't exactly remember the name of the book, but I quite like that book I introduced to our children once upon a time. It was about the princess actually rescued the prince. So it was kind of twisted story, but I think it was quite interesting and children found it quite interesting as well. So
yeah, I think it's called The Paper Bag Princess.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
right?
that's the one. Yes,
That's a great book.
Yes, I think when you choose selection of the books in the room, I think it's important for the educators read it through and try our very best to include all sort of different role models. And I think having gender neutral resources is very important, but I think the most important thing is how we interact with the children. Like, for example, we have dress up corners, and sometimes boys like to try on dresses, and then girls come up to him and say, oh, girls for dresses are only for girls. Then we can always say, not really, you can try if you like, you can act out the character you like to be. So I think educators need to be more sensible and attentive in that situation and use the right word.
Yeah, the language we use around children, and also like challenging those gender stereotypes that children are starting to express when you hear them. So in like your everyday conversations with children.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else have anything to contribute? How would you introduce the concepts of gender and diversity to children? Again, you would do this through books and stories and maybe some posters, maybe some role modeling as well.
Yeah, I think it's a lot on going on their lead in the play. I had a boy the other day had two wooden people, and they were both boys, and he said, oh, these two are married and live here. And I thought, oh, that's great. Yeah, that he was aware of that. And the same day, I had a girl who was wearing unicorns and said, only girls like unicorns. I said, wouldn't boys like unicorns too? No, they like horses.
They like horses.
So you just get such a variety of discussion that you can take on or let it go by at the time, depending on where you're at and what you're doing. But yeah, just listening to them.
Yeah, it's those conversation starters, or just the funny things that they say.
And just having ample resources for them to explore different, genders, having the boy dolls and the girl dolls and different dress ups. They can put whatever they want on the dolls. And I find the home corner is interesting because when you look for dress ups that perhaps a traditional boy might wear, you can find a rough play, superheroes, dinosaurs. Like, what else can we find that they could wear that doesn't encourage violence in boys? So just what's available can be tricky.
Yeah, having that range of toys as well as dress ups and a range of spaces for them to play in as well, like gender neutral spaces as well. Well, it's nearly time for us to get back to the group, but thank you for getting involved and having a go at discussing this topic. Is anyone willing to put their hand up to report back to the rest of the group, or are you happy for me to do that?
I'm I'm happy for you to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, I am too.
No worries.
You can do it.
I'm going to bring them all back now. Hello, welcome back.
Hello,
Sorry,
welcome
Sandra,
back.
you got cut off.
No,
Yes, sorry,
Yes,
no
sorry,
warning
Gwen, you
there.
got cut off too.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And can I just say, Dora, you were just typing a message in the chat and you couldn't press enter. But if you wanted to type it into the chat here, I'll get your message.
Yes, Fiona, would your group like to start?
We can.
And back to the whole room.
Yes, and I didn't. We've got a bit of feedback. If anyone's not talking, if you could just mute your microphone again, please. Yeah, great. Yes, so I can provide some feedback. Gwen was telling us about that at their centre they create an activity for the children and all the children play on that activity together. So one example was 3 rocket ships on the mat and all of the children coming together. But then the kids were talking about how hot it was outside and it was hot as lava. And so the staff decided that they would create a volcano. And so they've done some activities to create the volcano and play with that together. And that's a journey that they're going on. So I like the idea of creating a gender neutral activity that all the kids are playing on together. And Kavita shared from her experience as a teacher in primary school, children coming in from the early years centres when they're just coming to school, and the teacher set up a play space with all different types of toys, and seeing that the work that the early years teachers have been doing, that the kids don't pick based on gender what toys to play with, but that they follow their friends or their interests. So I thought that was a really nice example too, to see how all of that work is appreciated by teachers too.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. And I don't know if we said, but we were busily taking notes, so we will be sharing the notes after the session with you as well. Ange, did you want to report back on what your group discussed?
Yeah, so we had some really good discussion in our group. We talked about, the idea of role modelling and using books and images and things like that to break gender stereotypes. I think probably the biggest thing to, come out of it was people saying that, it's about being mindful of the language that we use and being intentional about these kind of things, about breaking those gender stereotypes. And so I think that was kind of the key thing that came out of it, that, things like, using pictures of fathers cooking in the home corner and stuff like that to counteract those stereotypes. And Sandra said that they've done that and it has worked really well, and that it's a much more equally used space by the boys and girls. So I thought that was really good.
Thanks. And I will share what our group discussed. We talked again about using posters as books, gender neutral books, or books that feature characters that aren't traditionally have different roles, and to use those resources to have conversations with the children about the messages. We also talked about making good use and having a variety of dress-up clothes and encouraging children to use dress-ups, and role-playing as well, and swapping roles when we do role, encouraging boys to take on a different role. So maybe they could be the parent that stays home and looks after the kid while the other child goes off to work. We talked particularly about one book called The Paper Bag Princess, where the princess rescues the prince. And yeah, just some again, noticing when children are talking together, and if they're saying something that is gendered or limiting and stereotypical, like talking to them about what they're saying, if it is appropriate at the time.
And actually that was something that came up in our group as well, when, you know, the kids are gender stereotyping, to ask questions and put it back, you know, explore why they're saying that, and often that can kind of break the, you know, break it down a little bit more for them as well.
Great.
All right. I will...
Thank you everyone for participating.
Again. Oh, good. It's gone back to the start. Excellent.
Thanks, Anne. So we came up, as we mentioned earlier, we came up with our own suggestions for how to start breaking gender stereotypes. And we'll just quickly take you through some of them. Obviously, you have all already talked about books, using books and stories and pictures and posters. And talking to the children about books and stories, you know, asking, and, you know, it could be about asking them, what does your parents do as a job? Who else cooks and cleans at home? Another suggestion that we would have is to swap around sex pronouns in a story, or maybe tell a different version of the same story so that the main character isn't always a white boy from a conventional family. We also have an online book review tool, which is freely available on our website. This tool will help you to think critically about the books that you're reading with children, and not just about the balance of the gender balance of boys and girls in a story, but more deeply about the gender stereotypes that we attribute to each gender, and to analyse the behaviour of the characters in the story. The tool provides a traffic light rating system, which will help you to understand the level to which each book represents diversity and inclusivity. So if the tool gives you, indicates that you have books that are less diverse or inclusive, rather than throwing them out, you can use them to have conversation with the children about the messages within those books. We have a few fun facts. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say it's a good tool to use to just help you kind of tune into those sort of things to look out for, and kind of keeping it, you know, front of mind. Fiona's just popped the link in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Fiona. Here's just a couple of fun facts about books. In a study of over 5,000 books, 25% of them had 0 female characters. And Time magazine listed the top 100 best children's books of all time, and only 53 of those books had females that speak. Some pretty bad stats there. Again, we've talked about pictures and posters. We've featured a couple of posters here from the You Can Be What You Can See series, which was created by Inspiro, and we will be sharing these resources with you. When we talk about role models, it would be good to talk about women in sport. AFLW, women's cricket team, tennis players, and also their favourite TV or movie characters and other strong female lead characters. This will help normalise women who express more masculine qualities, such as being strong, self-confident and able to express their opinion, so that they're not labelled as bossy or moody in other settings, such as the workplace. We talked a bit about spaces and play. A couple of ideas we had was around creating non-traditional role play areas. So ones that have no obvious associations with gender, like a pizza shop or a supermarket. You could also put those more traditional gendered toys in non-traditional play spaces. So dolls in the block corner and superhero characters in the home corner. It's also good to consider the size and position of a play space. So is the block corner a bigger space and in the centre of the room compared to the art and craft corner or the home corner? And I think Fiona talked about this a little bit, asking the children what play spaces they want to create and involve them in designing them, which will give them ownership of that space and ensure that both boys and girls will use the space. And we talked about everyday conversations, and it is one of the most powerful ways to influence children's ideas around gender, roles, expectations, and opportunities, and correcting those limiting ideas when they come up. It is also good to encourage children to identify similarities and differences between people. I think Ange talked about this a little bit, asking questions about what they notice, and for you to answer their questions accurately and honestly. Another idea is to group children in different ways. So you could group them by the first letter of their name or their birthday, etc. And this can be a subtle way, but effective way to help them think differently about their identity. And of course, by being a role model, considering what you say around the children to colleagues, particularly around appearance, and reflecting on whether you offer and provide care for boys and girls in the same way. So do you offer a girl or give a girl a hug when they hurt themselves, but expect boys to dust it off and keep playing? I'm now going to talk about the difference between equality and equity and why it's important to use an equity approach when considering the learning activities we provide children. So equality and equity are often used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. So the image on the left is a representation of equality, which is treating people in the exact same way or giving them the same amount. Equity, on the other hand, represents fairness and means recognizing that different people may need different things to reach the same outcome. In other words, equality is the end goal and equity is how we're going to get there. This is about men and women having the same opportunities and the same control of their own lives. But research has shown this is not the case. So how do we get to equity? Or how do we get to equality? Sometimes we need to put in place strategies that to compensate for the social and historical disadvantages that women have had to face. Strategies like programs specifically for women to enable them to enter into leadership programs in the workplace, or new policies that ensure flexible working arrangements for parents. And this will benefit women because they are generally the primary caregivers. In early childhood centres, we can improve gender equity by not just implementing some of those strategies we talked about, but by actively encouraging children to participate in non-traditional activities, games and play. So actively encourage girls to play with the more physical toys and equipment like bikes and trikes and the climbing frame. This is because girls might need more encouragement and support to use these toys and equipment more than boys, because they've grown up in a society and possibly in a culture or household that reinforces stereotypical games and toys and play. Likewise, we should encourage boys to play with dolls or in the homemaker corner. to ensure they develop a wider range of emotions and skills, like their caring and nurturing side.
So I'm just going to show you a video which you may or may not have seen before, and I think this, quite simply and powerfully shows the link between gender stereotypes, gender equality, and then moving to, the prevention of violence against women. So, just this.
Sorry, Ange, we can't hear the sound.
This is the story of a boy and a girl. It's a universal story and an Australian story. It's a story that occurs every 2 minutes, in fact. A story that happens 657 times a day, every day of the year, and in every kind of household and every city and region across Australia. This is the biggest story behind violence against women. This story doesn't have a happy ending, because this is the story of how gender inequality contributes to the murder of one Australian woman almost every week. Sounds like a tall tale, right? Let's take things back to the start. Here's the story of a regular woman. As a girl, she gets told how pretty she is, never how clever she is, that if she wears a short dress, she's asking for it. She grows up and gets used to being harassed by men on the street. That's just the way it is. Here's the story of a regular man. As a boy, he learns that women aren't equal to men from a very early age. Even though both his parents work, on the weekends his mum does the housework while Dad watches sport. When he cries about being bullied at school, his dad tells him to stop being such a girl and just punch him right back. Technically speaking, we'd say that these social norms, practices and structures have shaped both the boy and the girl, creating a society where women are valued less and men are expected to be dominant and in control. In such a world, disrespect and hostility is excused, and violence against women is far more likely. But back to our story. The girl grows up into a woman, the boy grows into a man, and they begin to date. He jokes that he hopes she doesn't get fat now that we're together. She's not sure whether she should laugh. They have the same education and do similar work, yet he earns more money. He's quickly promoted, like other men in the company, while she gets overlooked. At home, she does all the household chores, and he takes control of their joint finances, seeing as he's the main breadwinner and all. When they're at the pub, he puts her down in front of his mates. His friends stay quiet. In the morning, he wakes up and blames the alcohol and stress. He always has an excuse. When she gets pregnant, her boss says she can't come back part-time. After the baby is born, the lack of flexible job opportunities and childcare keeps her out of the workforce. She is socially isolated and financially dependent on him. He controls decision-making, and her. They are not equals. She is dependent on him for everything. So she never tells anyone that he has started to hit her. She doesn't say anything to her family or friends. She grows more isolated. She has nothing else but him. So she lives with the violence until their story ends, one way or another. This story isn't a one-off. It's a story shared by 1 in 4 Australian women who have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner. And it's a story of 1 in 5 women since the age of 15 who experience sexual violence, including rape, 1 in 4 emotional violence, and 1 in 3 women physical violence. But it's also a story that affects children. More than half of the women who experienced violence had children in their care when the violence occurred. For victims and perpetrators, violence against women is the conclusion often reached after a life lived in a society where women and men aren't treated equally. But we, you and I, can change the narrative. Better education, policies, practices, support and funding can prevent this all too common story. When women and men have equal power, value, and opportunities in relationships and in society, violence against women is less likely. By nurturing caring, respectful and equal relationships, and by creating equitable and inclusive communities, workplaces and institutions, we can create a society of equality and respect, where violence against women is unthinkable. Let's change the story, because ending violence against women starts with gender equality.
If anyone has any thoughts or reflections that they'd like to share, we'd love to hear that in the chat box. For me, I've seen this video so many times, but it really does still have such an impact on me because it resonates with me on a personal level, and it makes me think about how easily I or anyone I know could be in that situation. I guess the other thing that stands out to me is that I think it really clearly shows how, you know, seemingly small things like sexist jokes or comments have the potential, you know, for that trajectory and the development of attitudes which lead to violence against women. So, sorry, I don't know why it keeps going back to the start. You know, so the key messages here are that, you know, that violence against women starts with gender inequality, gender stereotypes, and then those sexist structures and practices. We want to make it really clear that it doesn't mean that all men are violent, but it means that violence is a choice. So there's a great quote from the Stop It at the Start campaign, which says, disrespecting women doesn't always result in violence against women, but all violence against women begins with disrespecting women. And often when we think about violence, we assume physical violence, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there are other forms, including financial, emotional, and psychological. And this might be hard for someone who's in a violent relationship that isn't physical to believe that they are experiencing violence. And then on the flip side of this, a perpetrator who doesn't hit or touch their partner might not see themselves as being violent. So violence does affect men and women of all cultures, genders and backgrounds. Men can also experience domestic violence, but what the evidence tells us is that women are at much higher risk of experiencing violence than men, and that men are the perpetrators of that violence. And again, we know that women who have a disability, identify as Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, same-sex attracted, or from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds are at much greater risk of experiencing violence. So research into family violence from Australia and around the world tells us that there are 4 particular aspects of gender inequality which have been found to predict or drive this violence. So basically what this means is that in situations where family violence has occurred, one or more of these aspects has been present. And these are the underlying beliefs, attitudes and behaviours, and they can start to develop from an early age, which is why early years educators are in a great position to challenge them from that early age. So these 4 drivers, I'll just unpack these really briefly. The first is the condoning of violence against women. So when instances of violence are excused or downplayed or maybe blamed on the victim. So you might remember seeing an ad a couple of years ago where a young boy hits a young girl in the kitchen, and then when the girl looks to the mum, she says, oh, he only hit you because he likes you. And that's dangerous because it contributes to a culture which promotes disrespect towards women. Secondly, we have men's control of decision-making and limits to women's independence in public life and relationships. So using the example before about seeing more men in Parliament, for example, and we might see this in an early year setting with boys role-playing the more powerful roles, being the boss, and again normalising that boys and men are in charge and that women or girls have that more submissive role. And we can challenge this, as I know many of you do, by switching up children's roles in the centre as well. Gender roles and stereotypes, which we've talked about already. So it could even be things like, you know, say, giving a compliment like, your hair looks so pretty today. It is a nice thing to say, but if young girls receive lots of praise about how they look, it's reinforcing the stereotype that that looking pretty or feminine is really important. Then we have the last driver, which is male peer relationships that emphasise aggression and disrespect towards women. So things like locker room talk, or you might remember the St. Kevin's schoolboys shouting that the sexist chant on the Melbourne tram as well. In an early year setting, this could look like, you know, boys being really loud in groups and excluding girls as well. So we've talked about how the gender drivers of violence affect women, but it's also important to remember the effect that these have on men as well. So I'll just show you a quick video.
The Men's Project asked 1,000 Australian men aged 18 to 30 about the pressures to be a real man. The pressure to be tough, to be the breadwinner, to always be in control and to have many sexual partners. It's these rules that make up the man box, and there are more people in there than you might think. When asked about these rules, 2/3 of those surveyed said they were taught a real man behaves a certain way. 47% believe they should act strong, even when scared or nervous. 1/3 believe men should be the primary provider for their families. And 37% believe they should know their partner's whereabouts at all times. Adhering to these rigid norms and stereotypes that make up the man box can be unhealthy and harmful. Young men inside the man box are those who more strongly believe in the man box rules. Compared to young men who are outside of the man box, these young men report poorer mental health and have a variety of behavioural issues that are harmful for them and others, particularly women. For example, 44% of those inside the man box reported suicidal thoughts in the previous 2 weeks, compared to 22% of young men outside the man box. 47% perpetrated physical violence in the past month, compared to 7%. 46% made sexual comments to a woman or girl they didn't know, compared to 7%. 31% get drunk once a month or more, compared to 22%. And finally, 38% have been in a car accident in the past year, compared to 11% of those outside the man box. Improving the health and well-being of our boys and men requires action across our entire community. But it starts with each of us thinking about the expectations, attitudes and behaviours that we communicate to our sons, brothers, mates and partners. Let's all break free from the man box and give boys and men the freedom to be the person they want to be.
I think really what this video is highlighting, is the link between sticking to those rigid gender stereotypes, so being in the man box, and then how those correlate with particular attitudes and behaviours which have a negative impact on women, but also on themselves as well. So we're going to have a quick break in a moment, but just to sort of summarise all of the content that we've covered so far, we've talked about gender stereotypes, how they are harmful and can limit children's ideas and opportunity. We have made the link between gender inequality and violence against women. Upholding masculine stereotypes can be linked to those harmful behaviours and attitudes, and things that we can do in an early year setting are ensuring that our learning activities, games and play are inclusive, encouraging children to participate in non-traditional activities and challenging the gender drivers. So we're going to take a little break. Let's just take 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So feel free to grab a cup of tea, go for a stretch, and we'll see you back here at 7:41. But we'll be here if you have any questions or comments or chat about anything as well.
If you want to raise anything, we'll be here.
Okay.
Just now I didn't shut my camera, because I thought there's a sticker here, ma.
Yes.
But it shows to them that I didn't shut my camera.
Every time I see those videos, they're so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, just being reminded, I think, of those sort of key statistics is really, yeah, even though, I've seen it lots of times before, it's still quite shocking, some of them.
Mm.
And the benefits for both men and women.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I did like Kavita's example, even just going from, and I'm going to turn you off. Even just going from early years into prep, that they could already see the gender neutral play, and hopefully that would continue.
Yes, and that's something we're going to talk about a little bit when we come back from the break, what else is happening around us and across all levels.
Yeah, I think it's good to see the bigger picture, with all of this as well.
The big impact that early years can have.
Mm. Yeah, if anyone had any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat box, or feel free to turn on your mic and ask away. Also, please let us know if you've got all the functions of on Teams from previous trainings. We've actually had people who have told us that they didn't have the chat function and weren't able to participate. So just let us know if you don't have that function available, and we can help you troubleshoot it. Thanks for that comment, Kavita. Yeah, I've got 2 kids in childcare, and I've noticed the same thing. Her best friend is Ryan, and he loves dressing up as Elsa, and there's no judgment. They love it.
It's just beautiful, and especially with all these different book days and harmony days and all these things that come up, what they come dressed as and just the way that they hold themselves and walk around and talk about how they're dressed is just phenomenal, and all the children are so accepting. I think I was really fortunate with the school that I worked at, but yeah, it would be nice to see that as a change across the board.
Yeah, at all, across all ages.
Yes. Yes, it really saddens me to see, the kinder kids are amazing. They come to primary, the primary kids are amazing. And then there's this gap. And I don't know what happens between leaving grade 6 over summer, coming to high school, and then I see a massive change. And that's a massive area that we need to target.
Yeah, I think you're right. Carry on with the presentation. Okay, great. I'm assuming I can't, it looks like lots of you have turned off your camera, so I can't tell you if you're there or not, but I'm going to continue on. Often when we do this training, some of the feedback that we get from educators is that we do all of this work with the children, just like Kavita was saying, then they go home or they go off to school or high school, and then all of that work is undone. So we like to talk about what else is happening around us in terms of prevention to give a bit of context. And this graphic gives a brief snapshot of some of what is going on around Australia. At a local level, community organisations like ours work with sporting clubs to increase female participation. Schools now have respectful relationships as part of their curriculum. Local councils provide leadership workshops for women, and even libraries hold gender equity and diversity story times. I know Manningham and Whitehorse Library hold gender equity story times every year as part of their campaign for 16 days of activism. For me, this really highlights that for change to happen and be meaningful, it is something that needs to be worked across all of these levels. Changing attitudes and behaviour takes time, but we've learned from other health campaigns like quit smoking and drink driving that it's more effective if this work's being done across all levels. And the gender equity work that you're doing in your centres is a very important piece of the larger national jigsaw puzzle. This training is an example of all of us coming together to work on gender equity at a local level. We also have a gender equity program by the same name called Free to Be Me that we offer early childhood centres. Some of you are already part of this program, but for those of you who aren't, I'll give you a quick rundown. The Free to Be Me program supports you to promote gender equity and challenge gender stereotypes by using a series of resources to look at your policies, practices, language use, and the learning activities you provide children. It's really important to acknowledge the good work that you are already doing in this space, and we can support you to celebrate and promote that good work to your families and the community. The program can also support you to consider the results of your resources and develop an action plan to implement changes. Another program we have is called the Action Grants Program. So we provide grants to schools, early childhood centres, sporting clubs and community groups in Boroondara and Manningham to support action around gender equity and social inclusion. You could use these grants to attend relevant professional development training, create a new program, or to buy new equipment and resources. Just a few examples there. So if your centre wants to promote gender equity or social inclusion and you need the funds to do this, you can talk to us, contact us, and we can help you to apply for this grant. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So we'll be talking about unconscious bias and reflecting on what this means when we're dealing with children. So as a definition, their unconscious biases are social stereotypes that form without us realising, so meaning that they're unintentional. They're stereotypes about specific groups of people, and it could be for any group of people based on age, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, or whatever. We learn them from our background, our culture, and our own personal experiences. For better or worse, we take all of the information from our past experiences that we've learned from parents, community, the media, other people around us, and we've packaged it into little snap judgment folders in our brains for quick access. And this is how we stereotype, because it would be exhausting if we had to assess every day-to-day activity or situation from scratch. So the biases that we hold are largely influenced by what we are exposed to, but critically what we're not exposed to in our lives. So, you know, this goes back to how we evolved and survived as a species, because if we saw someone who was different, we might think different means unfamiliar, therefore unfamiliar is bad. If we compare that to our conscious mind, you know, we, as in the thoughts that we are aware of, we might think, oh, different means diversity, diversity is good. But I think it's important to acknowledge that everybody has unconscious biases, and it certainly doesn't make anybody a bad person for having them. But getting to know what these are within ourselves is important, because it does have an influence on our actions and can be picked up by children in the same way that we picked them up from adults when we were children. So, you know, we all grew up with commentary about people's skin colour, about religious beliefs, class, or even things like somebody's weight, and ideas about what's acceptable for some people and what's unacceptable for other groups of people. And of course, we all become adults and create our own views of the world, but those little pieces of information that we learnt from our past remains with us, whether we like it or not, and can also influence our actions. So I invite you to reflect on the following groups of people as an example of unconscious bias. You know, people receiving unemployment benefits or the dole, female politicians, stay-at-home dads. What was your understanding of these groups when you were growing up? What was your exposure to these groups? Was it positive or negative? And then, you know, as an adult, how have these particular groups of people been discussed in your own social circles? It might be positively, it might be negatively. And look, maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable thinking about these questions in relation to these groups, and that's completely fine. That's the first step in identifying what some of our unconscious biases might be and where they come from. So what do we do with this information? If we've identified an unconscious bias, you know, we can learn more about the group through books, credible articles, resources that are created by the group, and look for more opportunities and experiences to become more educated about it as well. It's helpful to be aware of these biases because they influence the way that we interact with children or parents. And as we've already said before, it's something that can come out through the language that we used. And this was something that came up in our breakout room saying, you know, your mum packed a nice lunch for you. You know, the stereotype being that mums are the ones who take care of making the food, and without realising it, we're reinforcing those stereotypes. And it might seem like a small thing, but it's one of a lot of little things that can help build a picture of the world which children see around them. So mum packing lunches, I guess, is a fairly clear-cut example of language reinforcing stereotypes, but we know that there are a few more grey areas around language. So we're going to talk about that a little bit now. And look, first of all, language is a really complicated area. Unfortunately, it's not black and white, and it isn't as straightforward as saying this is the right thing to say and that is the wrong thing to say. And I know that we worry about saying, you know, the wrong thing, but, you know, I think it's really about being open to taking on board the progressive changes that happen in our language. We don't have the same vocabulary as our grandparents or probably even our parents, and we won't have the same vocabulary 10 years from now. It's a learning process for everyone, and nobody gets it 100% right 100% of the time, including me. And it's just like any other skill that takes practice. But this kind of thing is going to be so much easier if you openly talk about it with your team and you work on it together. And lastly, note by no means are we the authority on your use of language, but I guess we just want to sort of talk about a few guiding principles. So we've talked about how hearing generalizations can lead children to think that a category of people determines what they will be like or what they can do. And basically, you know, not grouping children together with certain attributes. So saying things like, girls, you're sitting there so nice and quietly, or Emma, that's not very ladylike. And instead, we should be talking to children in a way which recognises their individuality, not their gender. So comments about girls looking very pretty and boys being big and strong can make children believe that other characteristics and qualities are less important. And I think that's a big thing for girls, especially because, you know, we're already exposed to so many messages which reinforce that it matters how we look. So we probably need to be moving away from commenting so much on looks, and yeah, and that goes for the way that we speak to each other as well, which children pick up on. So, you know, putting ourselves down or saying, you know, I look terrible, I've put on weight, and things like that. Using gender neutral pronouns, so they, them and their, as opposed to he or she, when talking about people, animals, TV and books and characters. And this normalises gender neutral pronouns and makes us more aware not to make those gendered assumptions. So making an assumption whether they're a boy or girl based on how they look or how they behave. And much of our language is becoming less gendered. So fireman is now firefighter, and things like that. We can use praise to break gender stereotypes by complimenting girls on their intelligence, humour, accomplishments before their appearance, and likewise with boys, complimenting their compassion or their sensitivity before toughness. When we're addressing a group of children, we don't necessarily need to say boys or girls. We can, you know, either just address them by their names, or if it's a big group, it might be, can our friends near the building blocks join us on the mat, please? And again, it might seem like a small thing, but it's just one little way in which we're using less gendered language and making less of those distinctions between boys and girls.
All right, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. I can see we're running out of time. Unfortunately, we will often face resistance when working on gender equity, and resistance comes in many forms. This diagram is helpful to understand the scale of resistance. Often we imagine people at that entrenched opposition end of the scale. This would be someone who is very vocal or aggressive when they disagree with your point of view. And this type of resistance can be really confronting. Gender equality is a topic that some people actively resist because, as we just talked about, gender stereotypes are often unconscious, so they genuinely don't see the problem. We can spend a lot of time and energy trying to convince someone who is at this end of the scale, but we need to remember that it's very unlikely that we'll be able to change their point of view quickly and easily. This is particularly important to remember when we're dealing with a resistant parent or carer. It's not your responsibility to convert them into a feminist or a gender equity supporter, so we can take that pressure off our shoulders. It's only your responsibility to explain to them why their child was dressing up as a fairy or sword fighting with a boy, and to correct any misconceptions around why it was wrong for you to allow their child to do what they were doing. There are lots of resources out there that can help you deal with resistance and backlash. The Vic Health Encountering Resistance resource is one, and here are some 4 simple steps to deal with resistance. You know, the first step is around understanding who that resistance is coming from. It could be cultural, religious factors, or it could be an unconscious bias or fear. The second step would be to listen, acknowledge, but also correct their misconceptions. And it may be hard to correct a parent's point of view, but it's important to do this to help them understand why you do what you do with the children and why it's good for them. The third step is to refer to a centre policy or philosophy when that parent or carer is still resistant. And the fourth step is around practicing self-care. And how can we do this to ensure that we are taking care of ourselves and each other? We could do this by adding it as a standing agenda item to team meetings, or as an item for a staff and manager catch-up if you do that regularly. And to clearly advertise any employee assistance program that you might have, and to tell staff that they can access this program at any time, and it's free. There is a way that you can raise these types of topics in a less confronting way with parents and carers, and even in the office amongst colleagues. You could use your newsletter, social media, and other channels to promote some of the activities that you do with the children, and to explain why you do those activities with the children, or why that you set up that space. You could share resources, blogs, and articles, like the ones that we're going to share with you in the resource pack after the training, and to promote campaigns and events like 16 Days of Activism, This Girl Can, and International Women's Day. It's also a good idea to state your commitment to gender equality on your website. Communicating in this way could help change an unconscious bias or create a shift in their thinking, which would help them progress towards understanding how harmful gender stereotypes and the other drivers of violence against women are.
So I might just, because I know we're running a little bit short of time, I think we might just send everybody this little video to watch a little bit later on. I don't want to keep everyone too late, but I think I just want to pick up on, you know, the point that Heather made about those kind of little things that you can do, you know, raising the topic in a non-confrontational way like this. It's hard to change somebody's beliefs. We can't control that, but what we can control is the systems and the structures and things around it, to put them in place to help support that change. So I don't know why it's not letting me go forward.
Yeah, that brings us to the end of the training session. As we mentioned, we're going to email you a PDF copy of all the PowerPoint slides and all of the resources that we mentioned. We would really value your feedback to see what you got out of the session, but also how we can improve. So we'll be sending you an evaluation survey, which should only take 5 minutes of your time to complete. And just one more thing, we will be sending out certificates of attendance, which you can use for discretionary CPD points, but we may need to contact some of you, maybe via email, to confirm your first and last names, unless you're happy to put that into the chat box so that we can stop sharing. If you, stop recording, and then you can put your first name, last name in